Are you more likely to believe in Bigfoot if you've tripped before, or if you drink a lot, or if you've done crystal? Well, apparently we have actually done the science on this, and let me explain what we found. Today, I will tell you about drugs and conspiracy theories. So, in case you don't know, we're swimming in a world of misinformation, and conspiracy theories sometimes turn out to be true and sometimes turn out to be completely false, with some major public health implications. So, knowing what makes people more or less likely to believe in them and who you should not argue with on Facebook is actually kind of a valid thing. But here's the thing, we think that some drugs are more closely linked to conspiracy theories than others. So, for example, we see that psychedelics are being used in all sorts of things. So, things like PTSD to depression. So, when people take shrooms, for example, they actually become more open later on. And openness is things like you're more likely to try out new things or maybe believe in alternative facts. They've done studies where they've actually given shrooms to people and seen how it changes things like their political views. So there was a study that gave shrooms to people and then looked at things like nature relatedness and how likely they were to give in to an authoritarian government. And what they found was that a week and even a year later, people who had taken that dose of shrooms, they were more likely to be connected to nature, so increased scores in nature relatedness, and they were less likely to want to believe in authoritarian views. Now, this was all done on surveys. So they basically asked people would you enjoy a vacation out in the middle of the wilderness? Do you like to get your hands dirty? Do you actually believe in environmental issues? Do you find yourself believing that there should be a central control of power? They just asked them those things and found that, yeah, these drugs seem to change that. Now, there are scientists like me who are like, okay, so it's making them more open and it's making them not believe in certain things about the government. What about conspiracy theories? And maybe they were like me, just doing our ninth rewatch of X-Files now? I'm not entirely sure. But anyways, they were curious about this. So basically what they did is they took a whole bunch of people who had previously done a variety of different drugs and asked them questions. So the researchers here said that they are specifically interested in studying something known as afterglow. And so afterglow is when you've recently taken a psychedelic and it basically changes your emotional reactivity. Supposedly it's supposed to make you more creative. And it also changes your perception of time. So they're like, I want to know if people who have recently done psychedelics, are they more likely to believe in conspiracy theories? They said that they studied things like recency over intensity because intensity was too subjective. But y'all, that is not the biggest problem that you have in the study. So let me just explain the study to you. So this was done with a Swedish population. So they had healthy, primarily young Swedish people that they initially had done a survey about psychedelics and paranoia and psychosis. They basically send an email to them that says hey, are you interested in doing some more research on psychedelics? And then they just ask them how many drugs have you done? What is your gender? How frequently and recently have you done these drugs? And also, here's a series of surveys on everything. So we're going to look at personality. We're going to look at psychopathy and ADHD and autism. Why? I have absolutely no idea. And then they threw all of these things into one giant stats model to see what came out of it. They measured conspiracy theories by this literal 5-question conspiracy mentality questionnaire. Let me tell you some of the questions. So there are things I think there's very important things that happen in this world that we just never know about. Politicians do not tell us about their true motives for their decisions. I think that government agencies closely monitor their citizens. And there are events that seemingly lack a connection, but that are actually connected to one another. These are just general, broad things, and some of them are actually just true. Yes, there are a lot of governments that actually closely monitor their people. That's not a conspiracy theory. Have you watched the number of flock cameras that are growing? Yeah, I don't think that one's too far off. And then they also measured them on the epistemic belief scale, which I'm sorry for any of my former philosophy professors who are going to yell at me about this, but it's basically do you believe in things based on your intuition or do you believe in things based on facts? So they found that 3 specific types of drugs had impacts on conspiracy thinking. So they found that people who had more frequently and recently used psychedelics, they were more likely to have higher scores in that conspiracy mentality questionnaire. So they were more likely to kind of endorse conspiracy theory beliefs. They also found that people who taken stimulants, and that was the term that they used, they lumped all of these things together. So that includes things like ADHD meds to crystal to coke. All 3 of those different types of things were under stimulants. And they found that people who had taken stimulants more recently and more frequently, they also had a higher conspiracy mentality. And then they found that the more often that people drank, the less likely they were to endorse conspiracy beliefs. Now, they were yeah, there's only 16 people who never drank, so we don't know how good those findings are. Now, they intriguingly did not see that psychedelic use was correlated to things like believing in your intuition more. So, more likely to believe in conspiracy theories in general. Again, none of these were specific conspiracy theories. This was like the conspiracy mentality. So, more likely to believe in that, but not necessarily more likely to believe in intuition. It doesn't seem to be linked to paranoia either. So, remember how I said that they taken these participants from another study? Yeah, they found there that paranoia was more linked to stimulants than it was things like psychedelics. So their theory here was that psychedelics are more linked to this idea of adopting nonconformist views versus like outlandish conspiracy theories. Now, I mean, that is a possible theory there. Other possible theories include that people who are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories or people who are more open-minded in general are also more likely to take drugs. Because remember, this is correlational, not causal. So here they're suggesting that psychedelics actually increase the likelihood of things like conspiracy theories. And they specifically say, like, don't use this as a way to then like try to block psychedelics because maybe it's going to make people more like conspiracy minded. Like, I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem here is that you are pointing things in the wrong direction. Like, I think that there is a personality trait which is then linked to people more likely using drugs. Now, there's a simple way that you could actually turn this around to see if things like psychedelics are changing conspiracy theories. You can run an experiment. Now, I said simple, not easy. So yes, if you just gave someone like shrooms and then had them figure out how likely they were to believe in conspiracy theories before and after the shrooms, that would help. There are all sorts of problems with this. So first, there's all sorts of political differences between like conspiracy theories, and some of them might be true. But I used to teach a class on pseudoscience and conspiracy theories. And what I made my students do was like basically pull two different things out of a hat and then combine them together to make their own conspiracy theory. And a lot of them ended up believing that conspiracy theory. So I'm wondering if there's some experiment that you can do with that. But first you have to give the people the drugs, and then you have to test them, and that's gonna be hard to get past a review board. So do psychedelics make you more likely to want to believe and alcohol will make you less likely? We still don't know. And unfortunately, the science doesn't help us here.